Out in front of my shop, there's this big circular hole in the concrete where there used to be a tree years ago, and I'm going to do something different with it. So I started with 2 pieces of 1/2 inch rebar, 48 inches long, and I cut 4 inches off of one to give me a 44-inch piece, which I then cut in half at 22 inches. With the second piece of 1/2 inch rebar, I cut a few lengths at about 8 inches long. These are acting as legs, which after having used this little grill, they're too long. So I'm probably going to cut them down to either 6 inches or 4 inches. I'm not sure yet. Anyway, I took those 8-inch pieces and welded them on to the longer sections, one being a full 22-inch and the other half of that being cut down to 2 11-inch pieces. And to try to make that as strong a joint as I could, I welded all the way around that joint. I'm not a great welder, so these probably aren't very pretty, but it works. So then at the halfway point, I took the 2 shorter 11-inch pieces and tried to square those up as best I could. It wasn't perfect, but it doesn't really matter for what I'm doing here. Once I had that in place, I took the opposite piece and same thing. Tried to weld it right at the center, having the legs stick straight up. And then flipped that over and welded the other side. And then I took a 4-foot piece of 1/4-inch rebar and cut that into 4 12-inch sections. Well, they ended up a little bit shorter than 12-inch, but you get the idea. And then I tried to weld these in as close to meeting up at the ends as I could. It did end up being a little bit off, but still worked. These are going to act kind of as supports to help keep the legs a little more sturdy, but also to give more surface for any cast iron pots or pans that would go on top of this. I may add some more of this, some more 1/4-inch rebar later, just so there's a bigger cooking surface. But my cast iron collection is kind of small at the moment, so there's not really a need for it yet. I took the offcuts and made sort of, I guess you'd call it a gusset in the corner, just kind of an angled support to help give a little more strength to the legs so that they don't shear one way or the other. I got 2 of the corners taken care of with a 1/2-inch rebar, but I didn't have enough to do all 4, but I still had some 1/2-inch round bar laying around. One of the nice things with the stick welding is it doesn't really care if there's a little bit of rust. It just burns right through it, but we'll clean that up later. Then just using a wire wheel, cup wheel, whatever that's called, and a grinder, I went about cleaning up all the welds, getting rid of the slag, and getting rid of the rust and just the gunk from the welding process. And this probably isn't strictly necessary depending on how you would want to use a fire pit grill like this. In my case, I want to spray some black high heat paint on it just to make it look a little better and hopefully give it a little bit of protection because it's going to stay outside most of the time. Grinding and cleaning with a wire wheel is probably my least favorite thing to do with any sort of making that I do. I find it even more tedious than sanding, but it does make a big difference in the appearance of whatever it is you're making. So, no sense in whining about it, I guess. And I used Rust-Oleum high heat spray paint, gave it a couple coats, tried to cover the whole thing. Let that dry for a bit. While that was drying, I got a bunch of scraps, put them on that circle, added some paper from something that had just come in the mail, and got a fire started. And I let that burn down a bit so that it wouldn't be just full-on flames. I wanted to get it a little closer to coals, and this was kind of where I discovered that it was just a little bit too tall, so I'll have to trim those legs. Got the grill in place, put my cast iron skillet. Once it got hot, I threw in some Jimmy Dean hot sausage, cook that down a bit. Once the sausage was all nicely browned and crumbled, scooped that out of the pan to get it off the heat, and then prepared my quesadilla. A little cheese on a flour tortilla, and then I just scooped the sausage onto that. Added a little more cheese and some Yellowbird habanero hot sauce, which I highly recommend. Fold it up, toss it in the pan. And I like to use a melting dome when I do quesadillas. It helps the cheese to melt a little bit faster. Of course, you've got to make sure and crisp up both sides for even crispiness. And because the legs are a little too tall, this did take a little longer to cook than I had planned. Then on my shop-made cutting board, get it all sliced up, served on a charcuterie board, also made in my shop. Alright, here we go. Served on a charcuterie board that I'm finishing up. We have the best way to make use of your shop scraps, part 2. Let's see how I did. That's good. This just gave me an idea for another YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. If you want to see more of the silly things that I do in my shop, please subscribe. And I hope you enjoy your time in your shop. We'll see you next time. Sausage is good. Pork chops are good.